Hello there, my name is Conklin. This is my mass communications final media effects project, my favorite medium. I am currently suffering from allergies, so I'm going to try and get through this without sneezing or coughing in the recording. Wish me luck. And my project, my chosen medium, is video games, and it's labeled interactive media, video games. How one mass medium takes both the best and the worst from all the others. So, starting off, I think we should start with a baseline and establish what is a video game. And by definition, according to Merriam-Webster, a video game is defined as an electronic game in which players control images on a video screen. Doesn't sound super exciting, right? However, this definition's lack of specificity and open-endedness actually can tell you a lot about the diversity of video games and their place in mass media, culture, and entertainment. And one way that that's exemplified is through genres. Video games have a wide range of genres, very similarly to how movies are structured. But due to how video games are uniquely interactive medium, there exists a much wider range and scope of distinct types of games, with millions of games falling somewhere in between multiple categories at times. Examples of genres include survival games, horror games, sandbox games, racing games, MMOs, which are massive multiplayer online games, RPGs, which are role playing games, puzzle games, first person shooters, and third person shooters, simulation, narrative adventures, and that's just to name only a few of the many that exist, and is by no means an exhaustive list. Now, my third point here is that as a mass medium, video games are much more than the genres that define them or the images on the screen. Now, they are a relatively new medium compared to traditional media, but they are an incredibly prevalent and culturally significant aspect of billions of people's lives since their invention, with deep ties to advertising, movies, sports, art, music, magazines, the economy, scientific development, and of course, entertainment. It sounds like I'm rambling, but we'll get all into that shortly. Because to understand video games today and what makes them such a special and profitable medium, we have to understand a bit about their origin and their history of interactions and crossover with other mediums. And what better way to do that than with a brief history? I'm going to keep this incredibly brief because there's a lot to cover. Starting off, we're going to start with the first games, ranging from 1950s and the 1970s. The earliest games were very simplistic renders with incredibly simple controls and goals. The most recognizable being Tennis for Two, which would later inspire the hit Atari game Pong and Atari Breakout. Games at the beginning were more of demos of computer technology and a way to allow the public to interact with and understand computers in a physical way, beyond the abstract and new concepts that computers introduced with their advent at the time. Now, games for fun and profit from the 1970s and the 1980s. So, starting in the late 1970s, games found their first monetization scheme and general audience through arcade cabinets in games such as Pac Man, Donkey Kong, and Pong. The desire for games was realized as an opportune market, and arcade publishers quickly found ways to bring games into the consumers' homes through home consoles like the Magnavox Odyssey and the incredibly popular Atari home consoles. Despite their popularity, there was a notable slump in quality and a crash in the market in 1983 due to an oversaturation of bad games that consumers simply didn't want, most notably and famously, or perhaps infamously, being the E.T. games, based on the hit movie at the time, E.T., or Extraterrestrial, resulting in thousands of the said game's cartridges being buried in various places in the Arizona desert, and willfully forgotten. Games picked up back after this fiasco quite quickly when Nintendo released their own home console, the NES, or the Nintendo Entertainment System, with the now iconic games of Super Mario and Legend of Zelda in 1985. Technology only continued to improve, with the 1990s coming out with improved consoles in the PlayStation and the N64, or the Nintendo 64. And equally improved and higher fidelity games like Doom and Command and Conquer started to come out around this time. This is when games began to diverge and innovate into more complex genres, away from the platformers and simple top down strategy games, as the technology allowed more complex mechanics and stories to be told. Gaming into the early 2000s to the present, video games began to become much more marketable and successful as an industry in the early 2000s, especially in conjunction with the invention of the internet that would grow into the modern internet that we enjoy today. Online gaming and consoles, such as Xbox and PlayStation, defined the medium, with games growing increasingly diverse and tapping into different niches of interests, such as real time strategy games, sports, dance, and more, bringing in broader and broader audiences to connect with their preferred choice of game. Now, games are defined by an increasing number of indie studios or independent developers producing games such as standout titles as Hollow Knight and Terraria that can rival the successes of giant, well established game studios such as Rockstar and their Red Dead Redemption games, for as an example, alongside live service games like Fortnite, which came onto the scene in 2014 and absolutely dominated the market, and Call of Duty, which has always been a staple of gaming and continues to perform very well. Nowadays, gaming has never been more diverse in style, stories, inclusion, creativity, accessibility, and choices for both the consumers, producers, and advertisers invested in the medium. And there's my source from the textbook for the relevant information. So, how do video games play into mass media, advertising, public relations? Or to sum it up, how do they relate to mass media? And I'm just going to give you some statistics here to give you an idea of how the market exists and how big it is. So, yeah, the answer is actually quite exhaustive, so keep it to the high level points to save you some time. Mass media is defined by its ability to reach a large demographic and to generate a profit. Video games match this definition to a T, and to illustrate this, allow me to provide a couple statistics. And here's the statistics. As of 2025, there's an estimated 3.32 billion gamers worldwide, with the largest market residing in Asia with 1.48 billion, and has more gamers than the European, Latin America, and North America regions combined. 80% of gamers are over 18, with the average age being around 30, and gamers by gender are nearly equal, with US gamers, the US market, being 53% male, 47% female, and global stats mirroring that with 1.7 billion male and 1.3 billion female, respectively. And these are all consumers. So, all this to say, games create a massive demographic of consumers who share and form opinions and create themselves. These consumers are also very receptive to marketing, as very often the game itself is the marketing for itself or even other games. And they form communities around the games that they love, contributing to the social and cultural aspects of mass media. Now, one thing we haven't yet covered, though, is what theory does video games play off of? And that would be gratification theory. So, gratification theory is the idea that people engage with media to satisfy a need, such as recreation, information, and social interaction. And this fits gamers to a T. And they've gone on to the studies have shown and had surveys where they've had 60% of gamers in those surveys identified relaxation as the most popular reason for playing video games. And so that directly plays into the gratification theory model of the consumer has this need that they need to satisfy, this desire, this need to fulfill community, or this need to fulfill relaxation and de-stressing after a potentially very difficult day. And it plays directly into gratification theory. They'll pick up a game as their method of relaxation and recreation. And yeah, with social interaction, people who are very isolated we saw this very in a very large way during COVID-19, where during the lockdowns, gaming rose as a hobby across the board as millions, billions of people were locked into their homes and had very little ways to turn outward to interact with people around them. So, another big important aspect of video games is that video games make money. They're making money, honey. It's mass media, but for it to be mass media, it has to be profitable. And video games are exceptionally profitable. So, gratification theory leads to profit because people have this unfulfilled need that they need to satisfy, and they turn to video games to do it. So, there's a market for people who want to buy it, meaning that you're always going to have a market. And the video games are marketing themselves, often through trailers, advertisements, or just viewing gameplay or word of mouth, and they're very easily marketable in that way. Notwithstanding product advertisements and free marketing for existing products and goods and services that can be incorporated into games for the sake of realism or actual product placement, which is a very real thing. And video games have different monetization schemes with which that they make money. Some of them go via the live service model, which we're seeing a rise of, where a game will continue its service presumably indefinitely and continue to add content and support to the game if users continue to play the game and purchase content involved and associated with the game. So generally, they'll make the one-time purchase of gaining access to the game or to the title, or the game will be free to play and they won't have to make that purchase. And then there will be microtransactions that will be either transformative in giving the player an edge or an advantage, such as saving themselves time, which is very common in mobile games and their monetization, or allowing them to buy non functional but cosmetic items, such as custom skins or vanity items for their characters and models or houses or boats or whatever game they happen to be playing at the time. This is very prevalent in games that also feature a battle pass like Fortnite, to just label an offhand example. And yeah, like I said earlier, video games provide profit for other mediums too, because dip their fingers very intricately into every other medium that exists, and we're going to get into that shortly. But to sum it up, video games have other mediums interact with them, especially in the advertising department and the marketing department, that can generate other mediums money. And other mediums can iterate on the existence of video games and video game franchises and IPs to continue to generate profit beyond the lifespan of the original game. And moving on, so great examples of how video games. Oh, yeah, and just a quick statistic for you. The global gaming market is valued at approximately 522 billion. Let's let that number sit in for a second. That is several magnitudes more than the amount of people there are on the planet. So it's an incredibly profitable industry. And of the billion, the United States market alone generates a little over 90 billion of that revenue. So there's a very high desire to succeed in the North American market. So, how do other media and video games interact with each other? Turns out video games are very interwoven. They interact with nearly every mass medium that exists currently. We'll start with magazines. Good example are Game Informer, popular magazines that range from reviews to coverage on upcoming titles. With Game Informer, IGN, and PC Gamer, they show how well video games are integrated into magazines, as people are willing to pay these subscriptions to stay up to date about the most relevant news and updates regarding the games that they love, or controversies and drama surrounding the studios developing them. Movies. Iron Lung is an honorable mention, as it is a video game that directly inspired a feature-length film that'll be coming out maybe not later this year, but it's one of my fan favorites, so I threw it in there, that it's highly anticipated. But a more relatable example would be Minecraft. Minecraft is the highest selling game of all time, with over 300 million copies sold worldwide and counting. Naturally, this inspired Hollywood to make a movie to appeal to this wide audience, and is not an isolated example of a video game creating a successful movie. Others being Sonic the Hedgehog movies, of which there's already two, with a third coming on the way. Five Nights at Freddy's, which is another game inspired movie, with another second sequel coming out of the way. And the Mario movie, which played a lot of nostalgia, and another very successful video game movie. All these being box office successes inspired by games. News. Coverage for gaming conventions, world records, etc. So, the traditional news coverage of video games as a medium and gamers has historically been from a negative light, with a bit of stigma. But there's still many examples of coverage beyond this, with gaming conventions specifically for gamers and gaming, such as E3, PAX East and West, um, and Comic Con, to name a couple, and coverage of gaming world records. Oh, BlizzCon is another one there. And these events often make headlines quite frequently and do well for news coverage. Moving on, we have books. There's a healthy selection of games inspired by and based on books as a source material for their narratives and story, with notable recognizable examples being The Witcher, the Harry Potter games and franchises, and with games like Halo and Warhammer, inspiring books that delve deeper into its own established lore and settings. So that would be examples of The Witcher was originally a book that then became a video game that then became a movie and TV series and several spin-offs. Harry Potter being books that became movies, that became video games, and vice versa. Halo being a video game that ended up getting books to expand on its own lore, and Warhammer as well, delving deeper into its own established lore and settings, starting as a game and generating books. And then video games tie into music. Great examples of this are Halo, Rock Band, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a standout one. For the exact reason of video games are often the source of many award-winning and immediately recognizable soundtracks. From Halo to Skyrim to Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed is a very recent example of a video game soundtrack winning a Grammy Award, one of the highest awards that you can win in music. Video games also encourage direct participation in music with rhythm games and band games like Rock Band and Guitar Hero and Dance Dance Revolution, to name a few. Video games and TV, another very easy one. One of the most anticipated and highly rated TV shows recently is The Last of Us, and that originated as a standalone, narratively driven video game that is highly cinematic in its design already. Other examples include the Halo TV series and the soon to be released Until Dawn, which is a movie slash TV series that will be loosely based off of a choose your own adventure video game of the same name. Sports. So video games have always had an early life in sports, with games such as Madden, an American football game, FIFA, which simulated playing soccer, Forza and Gran Turismo for racing games, and the ever-expanding umbrella of esports, which are propelling non-traditional competitive games into a form of sport in FPS games like Fortnite or Rainbow Six Siege, or in tactical games such as StarCraft, Civilization, namely Civ 6, and MOBAs like League of Legends. So, moving on, we're going to go into how video games also tie into media in other ways. One of which is that video games are art. Now, art is designed to move you emotionally, spiritually, or intellectually. Video games and their validity as art has been a point of contention for a while, but it only takes a small look under the surface of the arguments to realize that video games absolutely classify as an art form. Games ranging from AAA titles to indie studios can each and all have stylistic choices that can set each other apart from the rest to represent artistic values. And if we go by the intent of art, which is designed to move you emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, video games have many standout examples of masterful artwork, narratives, game design, themes, and emotional and philosophical questions that can either inspire or challenge the consumer playing the game. And it takes countless talented artists, just an example, years of sketching, coloring, modeling, and post processing, in a process not dissimilar to a production of a movie in a studio to produce visuals for some of these AAA games. And that's just for the visual aspect alone. So, needless to say, if we consider cinema art, then games can be art too. Tying into that, video games are also music. So, video game soundtracks and the Grammys. I mentioned this briefly earlier, but video game soundtracks are incredibly commonly, popularly played on Spotify. And they are, in many cases, there's sorry, tripping words here. In many cases, video games have had entire orchestras and sound teams and design dedicated to creating soundtracks exclusively for their games, with a great example being Skyrim. And these soundtracks are even specifically engineered to keep the players engaged with the game. Hence why Skyrim uses very mellow, simple tones of violins and strings to keep the player calm but engaged. Other examples are The Witcher, and in terms of the Grammys, going back again to Assassin's Creed Valhalla, is a recent example of 2013 where their soundtrack, one of the songs from their soundtrack, won a Grammy Award, further illustrating the link between video games having our musical integrity and artistic integrity. Video games and music also tie together directly into the way that they create their games. It can set tone, it can set setting. A horror game is going to have very grungy, dark music generally, or game music intended to evoke a sense of suspense. But there's also games that directly tie into music as part of the gameplay, with rhythm games such as Geometry Dash, Rock Band, Friday Night Funkin', Dance Dance Revolution, and numerous other examples. And so, video games and music are very intrinsically tied, similar to how music and movies are very tied together. And yeah, just here's the examples again of game soundtracks that are frequently downloaded and listened to in people's free time, being Skyrim, The Witcher, Undertale, Halo, and Minecraft. With I'm sure that anybody reading this who's played any of these games can immediately evoke one of the soundtracks to their mind. And yeah, music centric games covering games that again have music built as one of the core elements of the game. You see this in mobile games too. An offhand example would be My Singing Monsters, where you place little monsters on the phone and they generate sound and music based on which ones you place on the field, allowing you to create your own music in a fun gamified way. So, video games are sports. This is also another point of contention. But the world of sports and video games have had a long history, with early games mimicking existing sports in the real world, such as football, with games like Madden, or soccer, with FIFA. Other examples include racing with Forza, Gran Turismo, PGA Golf Tour, and Wii Sports, to name a very generic few. Mario Kart is another great example there. Now, however, many games themselves have sports like tournaments that require a very high degree of skill and fine motor skills, complete with prize pools that rival or even exceed professional sports championships today. Much like sports, games have a similar competitive element to them, but also many games exist that require cooperation, and even more require a blend of the two elements, much like sports, working together with people towards a common goal against either other players or the game itself. And much like the sports, any professional player can stand to make a sizable living if they can compete at the highest level, with many professional teams and players competing internationally and winning sponsorship from companies ranging as far as Monster, Pepsi, Coca Cola, and tech companies such as Alienware, Razer, MSI, and many others, with advertising their products in exchange for the sponsorship that they receive, of course. Now, moving on to the next slide. Video games tell stories. This is a fundamental part of games. Story trumps all. Many games out there have succeeded from the model of mechanics first or having some sort of gimmick. or trying to get the player to engage with a very specific type of play. But more often than not, a lot of the highest grossing and most successful games in the market today involve some form of narrative, often akin to that of a book or the level of complexity of a book or a movie. And story trumps all. Grand example of this would be Undertale. Undertale is a game that has a variety of gimmicks, but relatively simple gameplay in terms of mechanics. Very enjoyable, but the story is what carries the game forward. The stories of games often can even bring gamers and people participating in them in tears, to tears or feeling emotions as if they are directly a part of that game experience, because they are. They're interacting with this game either as a protagonist or alongside a protagonist and joining the story with them. Their direct actions have consequences, as opposed to a horror movie where you see bad things happening to the protagonist and the characters. In a horror game, you are playing that game as that character, and the bad guys are coming to get you, evoking a very direct and different emotional response and a heightened sense of fear or suspense. Hence why horror games can often outperform horror movies. Another grand example of this is choose your own adventure slash choices matter games. Good example of that are Telltale games. I personally have a vendetta against Telltale games because their games present their choices as the choices matter, but ultimately matter very little. And then you have the absolute uh, other side of the spectrum with games such as Detroit Become Human, where your choices matter so much that there are upwards of 42 different alternate endings for the game, uh, depending on what choices you make. Especially with newer games that have come out recently, such as Baldur's Gate, which is another grand example of that. An RPG game where your choices can directly affect all the characters around you in a very, for lack of a better word, realistic sense or immersive sense. A game that where it puts story first. The Last of Us. It had such a grand narrative that moved players so much to enjoy the game and its sequel that it ended up becoming a hit national TV series of the same name, following effectively the same plot. Heavy Rain is a great example of a choices matter, choose your own adventure game, where, to provide some context, your father searching for your son who's been kidnapped by a serial killer. And it's a very suspenseful game because you have to go through these series of trials to find clues to find your son. And you play multiple characters who are trying to also achieve the same goal. And so it is another choices matter game where you're directly invested in the story and it has branching paths. And it's structured very similar to a murder mystery thriller novel in terms of complexity of the narrative, which drove sales and drove players to really enjoy the game. Until Dawn is yet another example of that. Plays into the horror aspect of choose your own adventure. And then Detroit Become Human, an example that I used earlier, right here at the bottom of this list, which I spoke of already. Brothers Tales Two Sons is also a very fun cooperative multiplayer game, couch co-op, and that one also puts story first in lieu of complex mechanics or competitiveness. You work together with another person in the same room to achieve the goal of that story. And I'm not going to spoil that story for you because it's a lovely game. And yeah, fundamentally, the list just goes on and on and on. As long as video games put story first, generally, it is incredibly profitable, as it is an interactive movie and players will engage with it and it will be successful. Now, let's look at some of the cons, the detriments of video games as a medium and as just a hobby. Video games and addiction. There have been multiple studies out there that have linked video games and addiction to being correlated or causated, where people become heavily addicted to video games and in lieu of having any other productive outlet available to them, they'll sink into video games and neglect their real life responsibilities. This was commonly a problem with big MMO games that required a high time commitment, such as World of Warcraft. or games that impose consequences on your real life time, such as Eve Online, where time is directly measured in the game equally to the real world. You have to wait several hours to achieve a goal and lose that equal amount of hours of progress if another player defeats you, which can be quite crushing. But yeah, video games have a uh, just like anything that provides anybody dopamine has an addictive element to it that people can get addicted to, but video games themselves are not inherently addicting. Similarly to how sugar is not inherently addicting, but people can get addicted to eating sugary foods. Another con of video games is a lot of video games exist on an online interactive environment. And more often than not, those interactive environments, similarly to social media, are unmoderated and unregulated, meaning that you're exposed to the meme world syndrome and quite often this anonymity that people believe that they're invincible because they possess anonymity. And so people can be potentially toxic in an online interactive environment. And that is one of the cons and shortfalls of gaming, but less of a direct reflection of the medium itself and more of a reflection of the perils of social media and why social media breeds monsters. It does inherit that issue. Video games are incredibly expensive to invest in from the perspective of both a consumer and an investor, depending on your perspective. As a consumer, you have to invest in the console, the controllers, in many cases, the PC, if you're doing PC gaming, all the ancillary stuff, such as a keyboard, a mouse, maybe a nice desk to set it upon. And then that's notwithstanding all of the games, or few games, that you might be purchasing generally have a high price tag, or live service models that require subscriptions. And subscription models are also something that I forgot to mention, but you get my point. Video games can be incredibly expensive to invest in, and it's part of why they generate so much revenue from the consumer. Now, equally, as a producer or an investor that wants to create games or invest in a studio that creates games, it can be quite expensive to invest in because there's a lot that goes into making a very successful game. AAA studios rise and fall yearly with flops and grand successes. A great example would be Cyberpunk 2077, was a game that had about 5 years of hype built up around it and player expectations that when the game finally launched were never met. And the studio that made the game was down millions upon millions of dollars in production costs to create that game, only for it to not even turn a fraction of a profit. Mind you, that particular case, the game managed to pick up where it had stumbled and has since regained some favor in the community, but it never quite broke even in terms of profits. And so it can be a potential risk or liability to invest heavily in a game with the potential that it could fail. Another example of this is in live service models. Consumers don't have enough time to invest in many different live service games. So all these live service games that are now currently popping up and investors are investing in, expecting a significant return, games such as Genshin Impact, Fortnite, World of Warcraft, to name a few, they're competing for consumers' time and energy. And that consumer cannot give it equally to all these games, so they will select one or two and stick with it. Hence, with a bloat and oversaturation of live service games, the market will eventually crash as consumers will not be able to dedicate the time and resources to make all of them profitable. Only a couple of those eggs are going to become golden eggs and get out of the basket, in the use of an incredibly strange metaphor. Another con of video games is predatory monetization schemes. This is most frequently seen in mobile games and gacha games. Games that either feature random elements such as loot boxes that require real money or in game currency that can be purchased with real money as a loophole to avoid direct purchases, which is banned in several countries. Uh, encourage people to effectively gamble away their money in the pursuit of a very addicting loop of rolling the dice to see what you get and getting either what's effectively worthless cosmetic or saving yourself time or buying in-game resources for the game that you're playing. This is incredibly prevalent in mobile games that use energy as a resource, such as, to name a few, Candy Crush, one of the highest grossing games out there, making billions of dollars, just off the top of my head, uh, where you have to spend money to get more energy back to continue playing the game. And this predatory monetization practices can adversely affect the gamers involved with it. People have gone into debt, especially in conjunction with video game addiction, where they cannot break away from this gambling loop, and they have lost their homes and their livelihoods, being what is commonly referred to as a whale for a game, where they'll continue to invest money and effectively get nothing of monetary value back out of it, as you cannot resell the game or resell any of the cosmetics or things you invested real money into. And this is incredibly detrimental and dangerous for children, as many games, especially mobile games, be careful out there, people, will have very few safeguards to prevent a child or a minor from engaging in these gambling practices or engaging in these practices where they swipe mommy and daddy's credit card and spend $5, $10 on a microtransaction, but they do that daily. And that adds up monthly and that adds up yearly and it ends up draining the bank account and potentially creating a gambling addiction for the child involved. So that is one of the dangers of the more unregulated side of video games. Thankfully, there is new legislation that is on its way to help deal with that. And yeah, tying it all together, video games do inherit some negatives of the other existing mediums. They inherit the production costs of what it takes to make a AAA movie or a high production movie, to be able to make a what would generally be considered a very safe, profitable game. There are exceptions to this rule with indie studios, small developers that make hit games like Terraria that generate billions of dollars, with relatively little studio investment, but an equal amount of love and care put into it. You also inherit the detriments of social media with the unregulated gaming environment and social environment where people can be toxic to one another or hide behind anonymity to be hostile to one another. Now let's look at the pros of video games. After looking at all the things that make it sound like a rather depressing hobby, let's look at why it's actually good, too. Social benefits and community. Video games have been linked to providing a myriad of benefits, both to mental health and social health, and people that play them, and help provide a community to people who might not otherwise have one. Video games are a hobby, and much like a hobby, and any hobby, they're hobbyists who gather together and group together and relate to one another based on the game that they enjoy. And with the vast variety of games out there available to consumers, and consumers' ability to pick games that align with their interests and values, it has never been a greater time to meet up with somebody that you met over the internet on the internet at a convention, and everybody gets super excited and dressed up in cosplay to go celebrate Warhammer 40K, for instance, one of the biggest conventions that happen. Comic Con is another great example. E3, PAX West. Those are all examples of community. There's also many digital communities, and such as Discord, which is a service that hosts communities originally for gaming. In terms of social benefits, there are several studies and psychological studies that have studied how playing certain video games, namely the Dark Souls series or Souls-like games, have actually helped people manage and treat clinical symptoms of depression, as they're challenged by this game to do better. And the game never directly says that you failed, it only ever says you died. And the results and consequences of you failing in that game or you losing in that game are directly results of your own actions. And so you continue to try and get better. And as you get better, you develop this sense of self sufficiency and agency that helps improve your mental health because it goes from you died to try again because you only ever lose if you give up. And that's just some of the offhand social benefits and community benefits of video games as a medium. And like I said earlier, there's a genre for everyone: sports, racing, hunting, uh, puzzle games, simulation games, tactical games, real time strategy, uh, MMOs, RPGs, adventure, FPS. The list goes on and on and on. And with such a diverse market, there's something for everyone. And that truly is reflected in the people that create the games, too. A very, very diverse group of set of people get into game design and create video games for everyone. Some games are created specifically to represent communities that they come from. Another very big positive of video games, and what keeps it afloat many times, is that it's intensely marketable and profitable. In order to market a video game, in contrast to a lot of, say, movies or graphic design where you have to really stitch together a campaign, some of the best marketing for a video game is simply providing players the ability to demo the game, to do a limited trial run of the game, or to simply show them gameplay and get them excited about what they see. And they're incredibly profitable because word of mouth will travel, and all these other social aspects and integrations with magazines and other media allows it to spread like wildfire and go viral. YouTube is a great example of this, as it is a media sharing platform for YouTube videos that has one of its foundational origins in Let's Play gaming, where people would upload Let's Plays, quote unquote, of video games that they're playing. At the time, very largely Minecraft, Amnesia: The Dark Descent, and variety games, to name a few, leading to the rise of these giant content creators such as Markiplier, PewDiePie, Jacksepticeye, etc. And these content creators became free marketing for the games that they were playing. Many of them were not compensated to play these games. And as such, they signal boosted the visibility of these games to the broader market, and in conjunction, signal boosted their own reputations and careers. And YouTube has a foundation in that. Now, YouTube is a massively successful platform, but still has a foundational roots in gaming. And gaming made it profitable equally to how YouTube made gaming profitable through that symbiotic relationship. And yeah, at the end of the day, video games are such an intensely unique medium in the way that it interacts and has many of the benefits of other mediums. Equally with the production costs of having to inherit the cons of production costs of movies, it also gets to inherit the studio like quality of professionally developed movies and people with incredible technical expertise that they will go to school for and learn film techniques just to direct and create a video game for the consumption of others. Artistics and creatives can contribute to a video game and lend it a stylistic integrity that you would not be able to find in many other mediums. And a big thing about that is diversity, too. Video games are such a mixed bag of diverse options that exists that very few media sources can truly relate to, perhaps other than perhaps movies and novels, just to name a few. Now, a big thing about video games is that video games currently are under attack, and this is an important aspect of video games and its history, as much as how it's being dealt with in present day. So, a good example of this is traditional media and their coverage of video games and gamers has traditionally not been in a very positive light, often labeling gamers as lazy, lousy, or irresponsible, or potentially linking video games erroneously to higher rates of crime, violence, and lack of empathy, racism, and sexism. And these are many ways in which the media coverage covering the games can give it a bad reputation and give the people who play it a bad reputation, and effectively act as a form of self censorship, or as a form of censorship, forcing people who enjoy this pastime, a very large portion of the world, billions of people, remember, 3 billion, 3+ billion people, a negative stigma that they don't rightly deserve. A grand example of this would be video games in the Satanic Panic of the 1980s and 1990s. So I studied the Satanic Panic, and what that is, if you don't know, was a period in the 80s and 90s where there was a moral panic, where people with traditionalist values were very afraid that new and upcoming ideas such as punk, rock and roll, Dungeons and Dragons, and new media that is coming out and change would corrupt the new generation and erode the old traditionalist values of the past. This led to many people decrying that Satan himself and devil worship was commonly associated with these new ideas and subjects and concepts in a way of discouraging people from even approaching them. One great example of this would be Doom. Doom is a game about a biblically empowered warrior going through and slaying demons from hell that are trying to destroy the earth. Now, that inherently sounds like it has a very anti demon, anti hell message. You're fighting the demons. But nevertheless, it still was a big part of the Satanic Panic and led a lot to the perception of video games as they are today. Uh, Another example of this is social and political groups that are lobbying against video games. Um, One example of this, of a social group that generally decries or lobbies against video games, are feminist video game critics. They are of the social group where they support feminism, but they specifically target video games as a aspect of patriarchy. And I believe that their views are a little misguided, as they generally are not very well educated in the history of the games that they speak of, and generally do not follow the opinions of the general market of gamers, being, again, equally men and women, only minorly predominantly men. Political groups lobbying against video games. Good example of this would be, again, during the moral panic, there's a large push for censorship of video games, especially with the games rating board of PG-13, M for mature, and such, where games are not allowed to contain specific content uh, without first going through this board. A relevant example today, in fact, would be Visa and MasterCard are recently and currently embroiled in a social struggle and a very large PR nightmare, as they were caught pushing Steam, one of the largest distributor of games, into censoring and removing games off of their platform to comply with their standards as they're payment providers, and they want advertisers to feel that they are safe in investing in them. Now, namely, the games targeted were games that contained adult content, games that might contain sexual themes or whatnot. But the big push against that is the fact that these are payment service providers. They are not directly involved in the games industry. They simply control people's ability to buy games or buy literally anything. And many people are arguing and protesting against this as a unilateral overreach of power, as any private entity should not be able to deny people the freedom and right to choose what they want to play or engage with. As at that point, that is censorship. And again, if we go into if video games are art, video games are narratives like books, then it should not be censored as such. Perhaps age restricted as appropriate, obviously, but should not be denying the consumer the ability to make their own choice and have that agency. And one final and very strong example of this is the current existence of the DMCA and copyright law as it stands, preventing preservation of historical and old games. Now, I don't have the statistic written on hand. However, there is a statistic floating around there that around 60 to 70% of all video games that were created for consoles are not currently available for purchase anymore in any way, shape, or form from the original developers or otherwise. And that is quite detrimental considering the history of gaming is very short. However, there's been a very broad and large amount of games that have been released in that time. People have attempted to preserve copies of these games and upload them to digital libraries since they're no longer being sold or and consumers are not being provided the ability to purchase these games so that they can still see the history of games and be preserved for future generations to be able to enjoy and respect how far they've come. As DMCA and copyright law currently exists, many of the owners of these IPs or these intellectual properties are denying people the ability to archive and preserve these games and would rather let these games fall into obscurity or outright destroy them and their source code, preventing them from ever being realized and seen again. Which, again, if we view games as art and as narratives similar to books, it is morally wrong to destroy that and deny future people access to that. So let's look at the future of Medium. Now that we talked everything about the games, where they have been, where they are, where are they going? Video games have a future in VR, or virtual reality. Virtual reality is generally a player will put on a headset, and through this headset and a pair of motion controllers, sometimes with additional haptics such as a full body suit or anklets, or even suits that allow you to experience sensations such as getting shocked or feeling warmth, uh, allow people to interact with the world almost in a naturalistic way, as if they were interacting with the real world around them. And through these virtual headsets in VR, they can interact with the world in a digital frame, similar to how if they were interacting with something in real life. This has many, many applications beyond just from a game and social space, which we'll get into in a second here, but also from a practical and technical space. The ability to have a 3D model in front of you, be able to pick it up and rotate it and dissect it, say like an engine block of a car, and see all the intricate parts without having to actually interact with an engine block of a car. Very, very impressive piece of technology and is only getting better and sleeker and lighter by the day. Video games have many applications for skills training, for jobs training, to firearms training, to flight training, all the simulators that exist out of there, especially incredibly high tech ones. Physics simulators included for the sciences and such. Video games provide this outlet and this ability to have a controlled environment, a resettable and consequence free environment to train people on potentially hazardous jobs or potentially high skill jobs that they would not otherwise be able to gain real life experience in without incredibly high stakes or consequences, allowing people to get very good at the theoretical and the practical. Video games are also being integrated with AI, for better or worse, depending on how the technology goes and how it's utilized in the process. Ranges from developers using generative AI to cut out a large portion of the workload in creating art or assets for their games, generally, though, leading to lower quality art and assets that might end up being derivative, or utilizing generative AI to, say, make their NPCs or non player characters more intelligent and conversational and respond directly to the player without having developers have to code in every single line of text for every potential interaction. So the pluses and the minuses of integrated AI. Games can get smarter, but also people can utilize AI to cut corners and potentially deliver a lesser product. It's going to be very important to see where that goes, but it is a core part of the future of the medium. Video games are social spaces. They already are in many ways. We see this already in games that exist, such as VR chat, metaverse, or even just on the online communities that form around these video games and the culture surrounding them. Video games as social spaces absolutely have a future, especially when combined and paired with the power of virtual reality, augmented reality, and AI. And people might get to the point where they'll be willing to meet in an internet cafe, except that internet cafe is two people putting on a headset on opposite sides of the world and joining each other in a virtual lobby or in a virtual space and interacting similarly to how they would in real life, carrying a conversation and through globalization becoming more globally. Sorry, different words there. More worldly and cultured. And there are many, many more applications and aspects that could not fit into the limited size of this presentation that I would love to go on about, but unfortunately, I'm out of time. So, that's the end of my presentation. Here is my works cited. I'm sure that there's plenty of offhand remarks that I made based on my own personal experience, but that is my project, and I hope that you enjoyed. All right, have a good evening.